Joining me now is Head of Advocacy at Women's Forum Australia, Stephanie Bastiaan. Stephanie, an analysis of British GP data has revealed that the number of children diagnosed with gender dysphoria has soared almost 50-fold, or to put it another way, 4,900%. Just 1 in 60,000 under 18s were diagnosed back in 2011, but by 2021, that number had soared to 1 in 1,200. That's 4,900% jump. And that's just the UK, Stephanie. Are we seeing similar numbers here in Australia? What is behind this data?
Look, these figures are very concerning, and there was a 2021 study from the Westmead Gender Clinic in New South Wales that also found social contagion as an aspect of this. But are we surprised? Gender ideology has been entrenched everywhere. It's in the classrooms, it's in hospitals. My 4-year-old daughter 3 years ago was introduced to gender ideology at 4-year-old kinder. We took her out because there was just the information that she was being given, she was unable to process and understand. And so these kids are being exposed at incredibly young ages. I was very disturbed to see last weekend at Midsummer, there were primary school children marching at Midsummer, at the Midsummer Festival in St Kilda. These are children that are marching along men in bondage gear, dressed as dogs with their handlers. I mean, if these men turned up as dressed like that in the classroom, what would the public response be? Who decided that this was okay? And so you've got kids from very young ages learning about this very mature, complex content, and somehow we're not surprised that this social contagion is expanding. And the other thing that's even more concerning is the fact that girls are overrepresented when it comes to gender dysphoria and social contagion, particularly in this country. And that comes from peer groups, from the way that they process trauma. It's very concerning. And I think it speaks to the fact that if we do hold an inquiry into, particularly a federal inquiry into gender dysphoria, which we're currently pushing for, we need to actually look at this alongside the data of the medical implications of medical transition.
Absolutely, and we are finally getting a review into this area in Australia. Health Minister Mark Butler has announced a review of what he calls trans healthcare, including things like puberty blockers. Are you confident that this review is going to be thorough, it's going to be fair and balanced, and not hijacked by activists in that area?
Look, I think the most positive aspect of this review is we're now having a national conversation. But the follow-up comments from the announcement are very concerning. I mean, the Assistant Health Minister said that she supported the guidelines, the current ones, and this was simply a review of those guidelines to get them expanded throughout. We know that AusPath has been behind the push. And even though the regulatory body that is doing the investigation did reject those guidelines back in 2018, since then there have been a number of activists, including the head of AusPath, the president of AusPath, who are now research fellows for this organisation. So I think an independent review is only going to hold weight if the people appointed to undertake that review are impartial and have no ties to these activist organisations.
Well, that is key, because there's no point undertaking this task if you're not going to do it properly and do it independently. Otherwise, we're just going to have junk data again. Now, let's turn our attention to Teal MP Zoe Daniel, who was ratioed in her own comment section after making this proclamation on X. She wrote, "To all LGBTQIA plus people in Australia, the Trump administration has begun rolling back protections for gender diverse and LGBTQIA plus people in the US. This is unequivocally unacceptable. Please know that as long as I am in your nation's parliament, I will fight for you and your rights." The response was pretty scathing across the board. I'll just read out one example. This is Giggle co-founder Sal Grover, who wrote, To Zoe Daniel, the issue is that by putting gender identity into legislation, the rights of everyone else were rolled back, from women's sex-based rights to parental rights to gay and lesbian rights to freedom of speech, belief and association. You should be aware it's not human rights if you're taking away the rights of other people. Bravo, Sal. I think I called her a co-founder. She's the founder of Giggle. This is showing there's a tide turn in this area, Stephanie. Every time I see a post like this from someone like Zoe or Jacinta Allen or some other politician who is going to engage in some vacuous virtue signalling, they are getting put in their place by people who are very politely telling them the reality of what's happening.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the beauties of what's come out of the US. It's inspired people to speak up and to hold stronger positions. We've heard from parents from private schools in her electorate who are horrified by the fact that their daughters are sharing dormitories or bathrooms with boys. You've got preppy girls sharing with 12-year-old boys. It's a massive problem. And what she doesn't seem to care about.
Massive problem.
Huge problem.
And one that she seems to be oblivious to. And in fact, she seems to be supporting all these excesses. We're unfortunately run out of time. Stephanie, Bastiaan, thank you so much for your time this evening.